My in-laws tricked me into signing over my house, so I outsmarted them and took it all back. Have you ever trusted someone so completely, only to find out they were scheming behind your back? That's exactly what happened to me when my in-laws tricked me into signing over my house. At first, I was devastated. How could my own family betray me like this? But instead of giving up, I decided to fight back. I outsmarted them in ways they never saw coming, and by the time I was done, I didn't just take back what was mine. I left them wishing they'd never crossed me. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now, let's start the video. When I married into my wife's family, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. My in-laws seemed warm, supportive, and eager to welcome me into their lives. They constantly talked about how they valued family above all else, and for the first few years of our marriage, I genuinely believed them. My wife and I were doing well for ourselves. We weren't rich, but we worked hard and managed to buy a modest house, a 2-bedroom bungalow that we poured our hearts into. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, and that made it special. At first, my in-laws seemed thrilled for us. They'd visit often, compliment the renovations we were doing, and tell us how proud they were that we'd built a life together. But over time, little things started to change. My father-in-law, who was always quick to offer advice, began dropping hints that our finances could be better managed. My mother-in-law chimed in with suggestions about how we should be leveraging our assets to secure a brighter future. At first, I shrugged it off. They were just trying to help, right? But then one day, they came over with what they called an opportunity. They'd recently gotten involved in a real estate venture and claimed they could help us use our house as collateral to invest in a larger property that would secure our future. The pitch was slick. They talked about returns, equity, and how it was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to set the family up for success. My wife was hesitant, but they reassured her over and over again. "It's all in the family," they said. "We'd never steer you wrong." I wasn't entirely sold, but I didn't want to be the bad guy who shut it all down. They kept talking about how they'd handle the paperwork and how everything was standard procedure. After weeks of pressure, I finally caved. That was my first mistake. When the day came to sign the papers, I didn't think much of it. My father-in-law walked us through everything, pointing to where we needed to sign and explaining the legal jargon in terms that made it sound harmless. I trusted them, so I didn't ask too many questions. Big mistake. A few weeks after signing the papers, I started noticing small, strange changes. Bills that were supposed to come directly to us were suddenly being forwarded to my in-laws. I mentioned it to my wife, but she brushed it off, saying her parents were probably just trying to help us streamline things. Then there were the visits. My in-laws started showing up unannounced, acting a little too comfortable in our home. At first, I thought it was just their usual overbearing behavior. But then one day, my father-in-law made an offhand comment that sent chills down my spine. "You know, technically this place is ours now," he said, smirking as he leaned back in the living room chair like he owned the place. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my stomach nodding. He shrugged casually. "You signed it over, remember? It's all part of the plan. Don't worry, you'll thank us once the profits roll in." I stared at him, my mind racing. Signed it over? That couldn't be right. I hadn't agreed to that, had I? As soon as they left, I pulled out the paperwork we'd signed and went through it line by line. My heart sank as the reality hit me like a freight train. The fine print clearly stated that we'd transferred ownership of the house to my in-laws as part of their investment plan. I felt sick. How could I have been so naive? How could I have trusted them so blindly? When I confronted my wife, she was just as shocked as I was. "I thought they were helping us," she said, tears in her eyes. I didn't know they'd do this. But, whether she knew or not, didn't change the facts. The house we'd worked so hard to buy, the home we'd built together, was no longer ours. And the worst part? My in-laws didn't seem the least bit remorseful. "We're family," they said when I called them out. "You'll still live here. Nothing's really changed." But everything had changed. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. My in-laws hadn't just tricked me. They'd taken advantage of my trust, my hard work, and my future. And the smug way they acted, like I should just accept it because we're family, that lit a fire in me. But I knew I couldn't charge into this blindly. They had the paperwork on their side, and if I wanted to win, I'd need a plan. First, I gathered every document I could find: emails, text messages, even the original pitch they'd given us about the real estate deal. I combed through everything, looking for inconsistencies or anything that might prove they'd manipulated us. Then, I hired a lawyer. I'll admit, I hesitated at first. Lawyers are expensive, and part of me wondered if it was worth the fight. But every time I thought about my in-laws lounging in my house, treating it like their own, I knew I couldn't let it go. When I explained the situation to my lawyer, she didn't mince words. "This isn't going to be easy," she said. "They have a signed agreement, but if we can prove they misrepresented the terms or acted in bad faith, we might have a case." That was all I needed to hear. While my lawyer worked on the legal angle, I started playing my own game. My in-laws were so confident they had won that they didn't even try to hide their schemes. They started talking about their plans for the house, including renting it out or flipping it for a profit. Every time they brought it up, I made a point to casually record the conversations on my phone. I also started keeping a close eye on their financial activities. They'd mentioned the real estate venture involved other properties, so I did some digging and found out they'd pulled similar stunts with other family members. They weren't just schemers, they were serial manipulators. Once I had enough evidence, my lawyer and I filed a legal challenge. The claim? That the contract was signed under false pretenses and that my in-laws had intentionally misled us. When they got served with the legal notice, the smugness disappeared fast. My father-in-law called me immediately, furious. "You're really going to drag this through the courts?" he spat. "I'm going to do whatever it takes to get back what's mine," I replied, my voice steady. For the first time, they realized they might have underestimated me. My in-laws might have been blindsided by the legal notice, but they weren't going to back down without a fight. Over the next few weeks, they tried everything to intimidate me. My father-in-law called me repeatedly, alternating between yelling and guilt-tripping. My mother-in-law, ever the manipulator, started spreading rumors to other family members, painting me as ungrateful and accusing me of trying to ruin their lives. I didn't care. I was focused on one thing: taking back my house. The court process was slow, but my lawyer was thorough. We submitted all the evidence I'd collected: recordings of their boasts about the house, emails where they downplayed the contract's terms, and even statements from other family members they'd scammed in the past. The turning point came during a mediation session. My in-laws were still trying to act like they'd done nothing wrong, but my lawyer wasn't having it. "You claim this was an investment opportunity," she said, flipping through the documents. "But these emails show you never intended to share any profits. In fact, you explicitly refer to the house as your property before the agreement was even signed. Care to explain that?" My father-in-law stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but the mediator wasn't buying it. The smug confidence they'd shown before was starting to crumble. But the real nail in the coffin came when we presented the recording of my father-in-law saying, "Technically, this place is ours now." The mediator's expression shifted, and I knew we'd struck a nerve. "This clearly demonstrates a lack of good faith," the mediator said, "and it suggests the terms of the agreement may not have been properly disclosed." After the session, my in-laws looked rattled. They'd walked into the process thinking they'd win easily, but now they were starting to realize that their scheme was unraveling. That night, I got another call from my father-in-law. This time, his tone was different. No more yelling, no more threats. Instead, he tried to negotiate. "Maybe we can work something out," he said. "We don't need to go through all this legal mess." I smiled to myself. "No deal," I said firmly. "We're seeing this through." The day of the court hearing finally arrived, and I walked into that courtroom more prepared than I'd ever been. My lawyer and I had spent countless hours going over every detail, and I was ready to face my in-laws head-on. My father-in-law tried to put on his usual charm, acting like the whole thing was a misunderstanding. "We were just trying to help them," he said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. This was all for the family's benefit. But my lawyer wasn't about to let them off the hook. She presented the mountain of evidence we'd gathered, every shady email, every manipulative conversation, and the recordings of their blatant admissions about the house. When the judge heard the recording of my father-in-law saying, "Technically, this place is ours now," his expression hardened. "This doesn't sound like a misunderstanding," the judge said. "This sounds like deliberate misrepresentation." My in-law's lawyer tried to argue that we'd signed the agreement willingly, but my lawyer countered with proof that they'd intentionally misled us about the terms. The judge seemed unimpressed with their excuses, and by the end of the hearing, it was clear which way things were leaning. A few weeks later, the decision came down. The agreement was invalidated. The judge ruled that my in-laws had acted in bad faith and manipulated us into signing over the house. Ownership was officially restored to me and my wife. When I got the news, I felt a wave of relief and vindication. The house was ours again, and my in-laws' scheme had completely backfired. But the story didn't end there. After the ruling, my in-laws were furious. My father-in-law called me, his voice shaking with anger. "You didn't have to take it this far," he snapped. "We're family." "Exactly," I replied calmly. "And that's why what you did was even worse. You betrayed us, and now you're facing the consequences." For all their bravado, they had no choice but to accept the court's decision. The house was legally ours again, and they were left scrambling to explain themselves to the rest of the family. Word had already spread about what happened, and my in-laws' reputation took a massive hit. Cousins, aunts, uncles, people who had once admired them, now saw them for what they were, manipulators who'd been willing to sabotage their own family for personal gain. Some even reached out to me privately, apologizing for not stepping in sooner and offering their support. As for my wife, the experience was a wake-up call for her too. At first, she'd been torn, caught between loyalty to her parents and anger over what they'd done. But as everything unfolded, she saw their true colors. She stood by me throughout the legal battle, and together, we rebuilt trust, not just in each other, but in the life we were creating. I took things a step further. With the house back in my name, I decided to make some changes. I renovated it, turning it into the home we'd always dreamed of. Fresh paint, new furniture, and even a backyard makeover. It was a physical and symbolic way of reclaiming what was ours. One day, while working in the yard, I spotted my father-in-law driving by. He slowed down, probably hoping to intimidate me, or at least make me feel guilty. But as he looked at the freshly renovated house, my house, I could see the bitterness in his face. I just smiled and waved. This entire experience taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Never underestimate the lengths some people will go to for their own gain, even family. But it also taught me that standing up for yourself is worth it, no matter how daunting the fight may seem. If you've ever been betrayed by someone close to you, don't let it break you. Use it as fuel to fight back, to reclaim what's yours, and to build something even stronger. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who betrayed you? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you overcame it. And if you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life tales of resilience, justice, and drama. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.